welcome. I'm John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety.
And I'm Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, a grassroots arm of Everytown.
Today, we're hosting Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms for the 9th installment of Demanding Women. And before I really go any further, it's really impossible to have a conversation with the mayor of Atlanta without mentioning Congressman John Lewis. He was a hero to so many of us, but I know for you, Mayor, he was also a neighbor, he was a friend, and he was a mentor. So thank you for building on his legacy, and we couldn't be more grateful for you joining us today.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. And you're absolutely right. Congressman Lewis was much more than a congressman for me, and I know so many of us, but he truly was a neighbor. He lives just a couple of miles from my home, so it was nothing unusual to see him in the grocery store or the Walgreens on the corner. And he just represents so much for us, but his heart was all that so many across this country know it to be. And that was just a very kind and courageous and humble man. So I'm grateful to have known him.
Well, really, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us. Now, Mayor, as you know, we've been talking to women leaders about urgent issues like racial justice, COVID-19, and police violence, all through the lens of gun violence. And there's just no doubt about it. Mayors are on the front lines of every single one of those issues because, as you know better than anybody, when you're a mayor, the buck stops with you. It's that simple. But these issues have not just touched you professionally, they've also touched you personally. As most viewers know, you recently tested positive for COVID-19. And I have to tell you, from all of us at Everytown and Moms Demand Action, we are certainly so relieved to hear that you and your family are feeling healthy. But you've also known gun violence firsthand. 6 years ago, your nephew was shot and killed in a case of mistaken identity. And like many, you have turned your pain into action. We couldn't be luckier to have you as a member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns, a critical part of Everytown. So I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, who's going to take it from here. I'm going to hop on Twitter, and I'm going to watch the rest from there. And just thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Mayor Bottoms, for being here. As a former Atlanta resident, I am thrilled to be talking to you today. And let's just dive right in. You know, I want to start with the death of Representative John Lewis on Friday. I know you just mentioned to John how much he meant to you. You know, he fought to make this country a better place. He was such an inspiration to millions, and really a leader in the gun violence prevention movement as well. And I know to you, he was a friend. What do you think we can all learn from the legacy of Representative Lewis?
Shannon, I know that we can take courage from his legacy. We was his life out on television, and we've seen what happened to him on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And what we have to put it in the context of is that during that time, he took a stance that was not a popular stance. It was not what was widely accepted, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. And he did it courageously and without fear of what he faced. And I think that is the same courage that we have to take as we confront gun violence across this country. It may not comport with what's conventional wisdom or what we always know to be true. But when you do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, then I know that history will be kind to us with the actions that we take. And I know that the generations will be better in the same way we're better because of Congressman Lewis.
That's exactly right. We really have to look at his example and leadership. You're a leader at the helm of a city fighting a growing pandemic that is not only impacting your constituents, but also you and your family. Has experiencing coronavirus firsthand changed the way you view this crisis at all, and how things are evolving in the city of Atlanta?
Well, I always took the challenges with COVID-19 very personally because very early on, I knew so many people who were being impacted. And interestingly enough, What struck me at the very beginning, when we had roughly 1,000 people who had tested positive for COVID-19 in Georgia, I knew so many people personally. And I knew that I could not possibly have known in a group of 1,000 people, at least 10 people who had family members or had been impacted by COVID-19. So for me personally, it highlighted for me that this was a bigger issue than we were acknowledging and had our arms around, and particularly in the African American community. And unfortunately, what I felt to be right has been proven to be right. So my stance toward COVID-19 really hasn't changed based on my family's diagnosis, but if anything, it's just highlighted all of the issues that we have, especially around testing and getting people their test results back quickly. My family, it took us 8 days to get our results back. Had we known 8 days previously, I had one child who was asymptomatic at that time. By the time we got our second set of tests back, three of us had tested positive in our household. And that's a story that's playing out in households and
Mm.
communities across America.
It's very true. And, on top of all this, you are being sued by the governor, who appears to be putting politics in front of efforts to keep citizens safe when it comes to face masks. And, we've seen the same thing in Georgia and other states when it comes to local city gun violence ordinances. So, how do you work to keep Atlanta safe when state laws and lawmakers are working to make your job more difficult?
And my mother says this to me all the time. She says, you only have to tell the truth once. And I take that to heart in so many ways. So even when it's confronting the governor or challenging what the governor has done, I know that if it's for all the good reasons and it is for something bigger than politics, then I know that, again, right is going to be on my side. And that's how my position as it relates to COVID and any of the other policy issues that we disagree on. My perspective is so very different because I am a mother and I
Mm.
view things from a very different lens. And I see firsthand how this impacts my children, all of our policy decisions, whether or not it's returning to school because of our COVID numbers or what we're doing or not doing in our state as it relates to gun control. I know the direct impact on families, and I'll just continue to keep pushing back. And we'll agree on the things we can agree on, but those things that we can't, I'm going to continue to stand up for it.
That's right. Fight like a mother. Gun violence, we have seen increase in America during the summer months, and it has spiked even more significantly this summer in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. So, what are you and your team doing to address this crisis? And what is the role of local violence intervention programs in Atlanta?
I've seen it as two issues that we have playing out in our streets. One is this immediate issue. People are dying from COVID. Their family members sick and they're dying. People are out of work. People are losing hope. And when people are hopeless, they don't care about their own lives. And when they don't care about their own lives, it's very difficult for them to care about the lives of other people. That's what I see playing out on our streets in real time. So there's this immediate law enforcement response that you have to have, that changing up where our officers patrol and making sure that we have coverage we need and those administrative changes that you can make. But then there are these systemic issues that are playing out in
Mm.
Atlanta and across the country. I was a judge for many years, and it always struck me that the vast majority of men who came into court, and the vast majority were African American men, didn't have a high school diploma. They perhaps didn't, but usually they were unemployed. So, from a city's perspective, we created an office called One Atlanta to deal with these community based systemic issues, making sure that people have job training, making sure that we're providing resources in communities and meeting people at their point of need. And we were having a lot of success, especially through our At Promise Youth Centers, which we have in the Vine City English Avenue neighborhood, one of our most challenged neighborhoods in our city. we were doing it in conjunction with the Atlanta Police Department. And that's part of my sadness about this summer. We were making such progress in our city alongside our police department, creating these proactive relationships that I'm concerned that those relationships have now been fractured given where we are in America. But we have to continue that work, that systemic work to address these underlying issues that's causing people to act out in a violent way.
Speaking of systemic racism, I want to turn to another crisis that's impacting the nation, and that is police violence. And tragically, Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed just a few weeks ago in Atlanta. Can you talk a little bit about your response to that killing and how we can prevent future acts of police violence?
It was heartbreaking to watch it happen. And what I know is that in Atlanta, we have men and women who get up every day, who go to work for our police department, who care about our communities. They work alongside our communities. I mentioned our At Promise Youth Centers, they're mentoring our youth. But clearly, there is a disconnect. When I said I watched 40 minutes of body cam footage, and to see that Rayshard Brooks talked about his daughter's birthday and what he was going to do for her birthday party the next day. To see that interaction end in the way that it did highlighted for me that there's some bigger issues at play if we have officers on our streets who don't think that there's another way, that there is an
Mm.
alternative. So the tragic irony of it was just before Rayshard Brooks was killed, President Obama had issued a challenge to cities across America to proactively take a look at our use of force policies. We had convened a commission to do that, and it met literally the day before he was killed to come up with recommendations within 14 days. The work of that commission has continued. They put forth a series of policy recommendations. We looked at the Eight Can't Wait platform. We pushed forward with that. And just before I joined Day, I even saw a text message that had gone out citywide to get community feedback on our use of force policies. So we will continue with that. But what's been highlighted for me really is a need for us to really peel back all of our training and all of the messaging we've given to our officers on what we expect outcomes to be when you have encounters within our communities. It's going to be some long term work. It's not going to be easy work. We're undoing a bunch of mindsets, but it's certainly going to be necessary. And it's my prayer that it doesn't have to be again in response to the tragedy as we saw with Mr. Brooks.
Mm. There's another tragic killing not too long ago in Georgia, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And after that, Georgia lawmakers decided, rightfully, to take a hard look at state laws that put Black people at risk. And you recently signed on to Everytown's letter from mayors, and it demands the repeal of Georgia's Stand Your Ground law. Can you talk about that a little bit, Mayor, and what else Georgia could be doing to better protect Black communities?
And so, as I just mentioned, even with the killing of Rayshard Brooks, there's so much work that's being done, but it seems to be in response. Even with the hate crime law that
Mm.
was passed after Ahmaud Arbery was killed, that law has been debated for many years in our General Assembly. But it took the death and the public's ability to see the death of Ahmaud Arbery for that law to be passed. We've got to stop being or reactive and make sure that we are proactive with our policies because there's nothing that can be done that will bring Rayshard Brooks back, nothing that can be done to bring Ahmaud Arbery back. But these are laws that need to be on the books because they are sound laws. And in Georgia, we still have such a long way to go. And again, it goes back to this bigger and larger discussion we're having across this country on how we view each other and how we humanize each other. What we know with
Mm.
our interactions with our police officers and with shootings, African Americans per capita are more likely to have deadly encounters with police than white Americans. that's indicative of a larger issue that we have in this nation. And for as difficult and as challenging as this summer has been, the silver lining for me is that we are talking about it and we are
Mm.
articulating it. And I think for the first time, we're seeing our own unconscious biases in a very cohesive way, and we're having a collective conversation about it. I think that's going to go a very long way. But again, it just breaks my heart. It is on the heels of so many tragedies in our country.
Mayor, you were talking about the power of motherhood and your mom's advice. I'm the mom of 5. I know you're the mom of 4. And as moms, we always worry about our kids' safety. As the mom of Black children, you worry in ways that I don't and never will. So, can you talk a little bit about how raising Black children guides your overall approach to leadership and public policy?
And so you mentioned my nephew Darius. Darius, in so many ways, was like my first child. My nephew who was murdered. Darius lived with my husband and I when we didn't have children for his entire kindergarten year. So he was our baby too. My nephew was killed in a case of mistaken identity. He was a college student. He went to visit some friends, and as he was leaving their apartment, he there was a gang war. They thought he was someone else, and they shot up his car, and he was killed. And the tragedy on top of that tragedy, Darius was very close to my father-in-law, who in so many ways at that point also lost his will to live. And so we know that it's not even just that one tragedy when families are impacted. There is a domino effect. And we lost my father in law last October. And when I look at my son, my 18-year-old, because I have lived through and experienced the worst that can happen, each time he walks out the door, my heart sinks because I know simply because of who he is more likely to be a victim of gun violence, and it's this difficult emotional place to be in as a mother because you can't keep them protected at all times. But also, I know the worst can happen simply because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think for African American mothers, that is an extra burden that we carry. Like all of us, any of us who have children who are in school, you're worried about that setting. Will there be a mass shooting in a school? Um, I'm worried about my children's encounters with police officers. Will he be seen, my 18-year-old? Will he be seen as threatening because you teach your children speak up and stand up, back down, except for when you come in contact with the
Hmm.
police officer. Back down, don't bring attention to yourself. Don't be threatening. It's very confusing for him. And my 18-year-old said to me one day, he said, you have no idea how hard it is to be a Black boy in America. And you think we began by talking about Congressman Lewis and all that he worked for and all the sacrifices so that our children would not have to live this experience. And yet they are. And unfortunately, it's a heightened awareness as it relates to our police officers, and quite frankly, even with one another. In all of the trauma and the unattended to consequences of living with depression and anxiety and all these things that are prevalent in the African American community because of systemic racism, it often makes them turn um, their anger toward one another, and it's a heavy burden.
Mayor, I speak on behalf of everyone in saying I'm so sorry for the loss of your nephew, and also thank you for sharing that story with us. It was very, very powerful. We're going to go to a video question right now, if that's okay, from Riley Holland, a Students Demand Action volunteer at Georgia Tech.
Hi, Mayor Bottoms. I hope you're doing well. My name is Riley, and I wanted to ask you a question today. It's clear that this fall is going to look very different for many students. My school, Georgia Tech, is going to be hybrid this fall. This means that students on my campus are going to be at high risk for COVID-19 as cases continue to surge in Georgia. And as always, we're at risk of armed students as Georgia allows guns on campuses. I can't help but feel that my safety is at risk when I go back to school. So, what's your advice for students in Atlanta and across the country as we navigate the upcoming year?
That's a great question. My advice is you can't live in fear. And if we lived each and every day in fear, we wouldn't be productive. But what we can do is live each day in action. And the reason that we allow guns on campuses is because we have elected officials who voted to do so. And so when we take this anger and this anxiety and turn it into action, that's when we have change across America. That's what we saw with the civil rights movement. And I know that it can be in 2020, but it has to be collective action. And my advice is just work each and every day to make sure that you're working towards change in America, not from a point of fear, but from a point of action and from a point of empowerment, because there are more people who agree with Rowley and other students who are feeling this anxiousness than not. But there are a few people who are elected to make decisions in this state who don't always represent the will of the vast majority of people. But when you mobilize, and again, you think about John Lewis and SNCC and the civil rights movement, that action came from students. The freedom rides were put together by students. That action came from students who saying we want to change. And we've already seen that across this country. We've seen that with our students out of Florida. And the same thing can happen across this country, but I think it has to be coordinated action.
Thank you for that answer. And thank you so much, Riley, for your question. Mayor, I'd like to pivot to 2020. You are the chairperson now of the DNC Platform Drafting Committee. How do you think the platform and Vice President Biden should approach gun safety leading up to Election Day?
What I most appreciated about the composition of the platform committee is that there was representation not just from the Biden campaign, but also from Senator Sanders' campaign, and really a coming together of so many people who may have supported other candidates, but have all aligned to work to create a platform that really reflects the best of who we are and the policies that reflect what we want across America. And I believe that our platform will do just that. Vice President Biden has always been very vocal about his views on gun control and our need to close many of the loopholes and the background check loopholes and so many other more stringent things that we in place, and even with legislation that he's had in place or that he put in place as a senator, the assault weapons ban. So some of the work will be us picking up where the Obama Biden administration left off, and some of it will be new work that will move us forward. And I believe the DNC platform reflects that work that is going to continue to move us forward.
And Mayor, speaking of the election, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen instances in primaries where there have been very long lines at the polls, particularly in Black districts where voters have spent hours waiting to vote. Do you have any thoughts on what we can do to ensure a fair election in November?
I believe we have to vote in such record high numbers that there's no room for error. Voter suppression comes in many ways. Sometimes it's purging of the voter rolls. That's a very overt way of exercising or pushing toward voter suppression. And then there are these more subtle or not so subtle ways, and we saw it in the primary in Georgia, where people waited 6 to 8 hours to vote, where people like me requested absentee ballots that never came in the mail. Voter suppression is real. We've seen it during the primary season. We will see it in November. But that's why it's important that we show up to vote, and we don't leave any vote uncast, because there is going to be an effort to suppress our vote, especially in Black and Brown communities. We've got to vote early and do it in such high numbers that even when some votes are suppressed, because it's going to happen, that there's still no room for error.
Thank you for that message. And the last question for you, Mayor, I'd like to close with your message to Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action volunteers who have been fighting tirelessly for gun safety and winning. Anything that you want to say to activists on this issue?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for this incredibly important that you are doing. I don't know that there's any work that's more important facing our nation right now. And the other thing I like to say is don't be discouraged. This is not a time to be fearful. It's not a time to dial back. It's not a time for us to leave our fate up to others. This is a time for us to continue to take action and to push forward and do the right thing, because it is the right thing to do. It may seem daunting. It may seem like you're not making any headway. But even if it is not for us today, think about the generations that will count on us for the work that you all are doing. And think about the life of John Lewis. What he did on that bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and what so many others sacrificed and worked for, was not necessarily something that they were able to see the benefits for in that year or even in their lifetime. But 50, 60 years later, we are a very different country because of that. And that's the work that I see that you all are doing, and the work that the generations will be grateful for and will be better for.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Your answer gave me goosebumps, and thank you for bringing it back to Congressman Lewis. And we're just so grateful that you joined us today, and we're grateful for your voice in this fight, and also that you're in our corner.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who joined us today on Twitter and on Facebook. We will be back with Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth on Thursday, July 23rd at 1:15 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to join us in this fight, please get involved in Everytown Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action by texting the word READY to 64433. Again, that's the word READY to 64433. And as always, stay safe. Remember, nothing is more productive, persuasive, or powerful than demanding women.